They told me I wasn't cut out for the family legacy. Not in so many words, no, my parents were far too polished for that. But every choice, every silence, every redirected opportunity spoke louder than any outright rejection. From the time I was 12, I knew my sister Vanessa was the chosen one. She had the polish, the charm, the ability to recite real estate jargon like poetry. Me, I painted, I read, I wandered off during corporate galas to sketch stone arches and peeling paint. They called it a phase. It wasn't. 5 years ago, I packed my bags and left. No screaming, no big blowout, just an unspoken agreement I didn't belong in their world, and they had no intention of meeting me in mine. I built a life for myself as an artist in Portland, far from the marble floors and legacy dinners of the Miller estate. Then the call came. A crash on the interstate. Black ice. My parents gone. Vanessa, of course I had handled the funeral. I hadn't even been notified. It wasn't until a week later that Mr. Raymond, the family's old attorney, reached out. He asked me to return home. Not out of sentiment. Not out of obligation. But because, as he put it, there are matters that directly concern you. I almost didn't go. After all, they'd already signed everything over to Vanessa years ago. The company, the estate, even the art collection I once helped catalog. I was the forgotten daughter. But something in Raymond's voice made me pause, a flicker of something unfinished. And so I returned. Not to claim anything, not to reopen wounds, but to learn why. After all these years, they still couldn't quite erase me. And what I found changed everything. They used to say Vanessa was born for it. At every dinner party, every fundraiser, every boardroom lunch she was dragged to as a teenager, someone would eventually say it. That girl's a natural. You can tell she'll take over one day. And my parents would smile, half proud, half smug, like it was inevitable, like she had been stamped with destiny. Meanwhile, I was in the corner sketching the crystal glasses. It started subtly. Vanessa was enrolled in etiquette classes. I was sent to art camp. She was invited to sit in on budget meetings. I was encouraged to express myself freely as long as it didn't interfere with real responsibilities. At first, I didn't mind. I loved color and texture and form. I found joy in solitude. But over time, I started to notice the difference in how they looked at us, her with investment, me with polite dismissal. At 13, I won first place in a regional art competition. My parents missed the award ceremony because Vanessa was being recognized at a business luncheon for teens. At 16, I got a partial scholarship to a prestigious arts academy. My father folded the letter and said, "But what's the backup plan?" By the time we graduated high school, the contrast between us was no longer subtle. Vanessa was introduced at company events as our future, while I was introduced when necessary as our other daughter. She went off to Wharton. I enrolled at a state university, double majoring in fine arts and architecture, paying my way with scholarships and commissions. I didn't resent Vanessa. Not really. She was a product of their design, just as I was a casualty of it. She soaked up their attention like she was born to do so, and I learned to expect little. She wasn't cruel, just completely uninterested in anything that didn't serve her a cent. And our parents, they didn't yell or belittle. They simply steered the ship and left me drifting behind. It's easier to ignore the child who doesn't demand much, who doesn't compete, who quietly walks away. The moment I knew, truly knew, that I was never going to be part of their world happened in my final year of college. Vanessa had just been named Junior Development Officer at the Miller Group. There was a press release, a photo shoot, even a welcome party in the company atrium. I sent my parents a digital portfolio I'd compiled for an exhibition I was co-curating, my biggest opportunity to date. It featured 12 mixed media pieces interpreting post-industrial architecture in forgotten American towns. I'd poured myself into that project for nearly a year. My father never responded. My mother sent back a 3-word email. Looks very abstract. I remember staring at those words like they were a slap. Not because they were harsh, because they were so utterly indifferent. After graduation, I didn't even return home. I rented a cheap studio in Portland and started from scratch. I taught art workshops, took commission work, curated small exhibitions. The first time I was featured in Northwest Creative's Quarterly, I didn't bother sending the article. The next year, when one of my pieces sold to a collector for more than my entire college tuition, I told no one. Because by then, I'd learned validation from them wasn't just unavailable. It was irrelevant. And yet, standing in the mirror at the Portland airport 5 years later, smoothing down a black blouse I hadn't worn since my last gallery opening, I felt the old weight creep back, that heavy sense of being the ghost child returning to a home that never fully claimed her. They had given everything to Vanessa. That much I knew. The will had been updated when I was 23. I'd overheard them discussing it once, not knowing I was in the next room. She's not built for this world. My father had said, she's too emotional. My mother had agreed. She'll be fine doing whatever it is she does. So why was I going back? The answer, if I'm honest, is this: I still needed to know. Not what they left me, because I expected nothing, but whether they ever truly saw me, not the version they dismissed, but the woman I'd become. Portland gave me something Boston never did: space. Not just the literal kind, though my studio in the converted cannery had plenty of that too. I'm talking about emotional space. Space to breathe without being measured. Space to fail without judgment. Space to succeed without obligation. I found a kind of freedom I didn't know I had been starving for. I taught community art classes in the mornings, kids mostly. Some teenagers. A few adults trying to reconnect with something they'd lost. I loved watching them lose themselves in color, in shape, in expression. It reminded me that worth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet and slow, like ink soaking into canvas. In the afternoons, I worked on commissions. Murals for cafes, album covers for local bands, installations for grassroots festivals. None of it made me rich, but it made me whole. Slowly, over years, my name began to travel, not far at first, just across neighborhoods, then across cities. One day, a woman flew in from Toronto just to buy one of my pieces. Another time, a collector in New York called me a revelation in industrial minimalism. I didn't tell anyone back home. That phrase, back home, still caught in my throat. I wasn't sure Boston had ever truly been home. My parents' house had been a museum of their ambitions, polished and cold. Vanessa lived there too after college, still in that cocoon of curated legacy, planning board meetings in heels that cost more than my rent. When our parents updated the company's website, they listed Vanessa as Director of Vision and Expansion. The phrasing made me laugh, half envy, half amusement. What did that even mean? Vision in their world was always limited to real estate value. Measured in square footage and profit margins, I hadn't seen Vanessa in almost 5 years. The last time was at our cousin Melissa's wedding, where she barely looked up from her phone during the ceremony and introduced me to a colleague as my sister, the one who does art. I remember thinking, she doesn't even say my name anymore. And yet, despite the silence, the years, the will I knew had left me out when Mr. Raymond called. I boarded the flight without hesitation. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was grief I didn't know how to name. Or maybe, deep down, I wasn't as done with them as I pretended to be. The moment I landed, the cold hit me first. That New England bite that stings your fingertips before you've even zipped your coat. I hailed a cab and gave the address of the bed and breakfast where I'd booked a room. Not the Miller estate. I hadn't been there in years, and I had no plans of returning now. The funeral had already passed. Vanessa had made sure I didn't get the memo. I found out from a mutual acquaintance on social media. So sorry to hear about your parents. They'd written under a painting I'd posted. I didn't even know they were gone, but Mr. Raymond had tracked me down anyway. I know this is unexpected, he'd said over the phone, his voice weathered but gentle. But there are things I believe you deserve to know. Please consider attending the reading, now, sitting in the guest room of a Victorian inn overlooking icy rooftops. I watched the wind move through leafless branches and wondered what he meant. He hadn't said inherit. He said deserve. It was a small difference. But it cracked something open. The morning of the will reading. I woke early. Not because I had to, I wasn't due at Raymond and Whitmore until 11, but because sleep had been shallow, broken. My dreams were filled with faces I hadn't seen in years, voices that belonged to hallways I no longer walked. I made myself tea in the little kitchen downstairs and stared out the window as the city slowly came alive. The Boston skyline hadn't changed much, but I no longer flinched at memories. I no longer needed their approval like oxygen, but I'd be lying if I said the ghosts didn't whisper. Around 9, I decided to take a walk. I found myself on familiar streets, drifting more than planning. The sidewalks were salt-streaked, the air brittle with late winter chill. I passed the florist where my mother used to order centerpieces, the old bookshop where I'd hide for hours as a teenager. My boots crunched to a stop outside a coffee shop I hadn't thought of in years, Gibson's Grind. It was where I'd go after school, sketching in spiral notebooks while sipping bitter hot chocolate. I pushed open the door. Same faded leather couches, same chalkboard menu, same clatter of cups and murmured conversations. I was waiting for my order when I heard someone say my name. Elaine, I turned. At first I didn't recognize her. The hair was shorter, dyed darker, but then it clicked. Mira Dalton, a high school debate team. We'd been friends once. The kind you keep close because you both know what it's like to live in the shadow of more glamorous siblings. She blinked at me. Wow. I didn't think you'd be back for, well, anything. Didn't plan to be, I said, managing a smile. We made awkward small-talk careers, cities, weather, and then she tilted her head. I was surprised to hear about the will. Honestly, I froze. What about the will? She paused. Vanessa said everything had been sorted, that your parents made her sole heir years ago. She said you'd moved on. There was something in her tone, hesitation, discomfort, like she wasn't sure if she'd stepped over a line. She also said you'd had some kind of break after college, that you couldn't handle the pressure of the family expectations. My stomach nodded. I see, I said quietly, my voice measured. Mira flushed. I didn't believe it. I mean, you always seemed clear-headed to me, but you know how this town works. Gossip tends to become truth if it's repeated enough. My coffee was ready. I thanked the barista, turned back to Mira with a polite nod. It was nice seeing you. I left without another word, my pulse pounding. So this was the story Vanessa had crafted, that I'd cracked under pressure, that I had willingly walked away, that I was unstable, unreliable, a myth carefully planted and left to grow in my absence. But the part that stayed with me wasn't the lie. It was the fact that she had gone to such lengths to explain me away, as if she knew I might return someday, as if she feared what might happen if I did. Back at the inn, I called Mr. Raymond. Do you have time to meet before the reading, I asked. A pause. Then, yes. In fact, I was about to suggest the same. Mr. Raymond's office looked exactly as I remembered it. Heavy oak paneling, Persian rugs, bookshelves lined with neatly organized leather-bound volumes no one had touched in years. The kind of place where legacy didn't just hang in the air, it was lacquered into the furniture. He greeted me at the door with that same measured, precise warmth I remembered from childhood. Elaine, he said, clasping my hand. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." I sank into the chair across from his desk, still clutching my coffee cup like a shield. "You said there were matters that concern me directly, before the will is read." He nodded and opened a drawer. "Your father requested that I give this to you personally, regardless of whether you attended the reading." From within the drawer, he removed a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in my father's angular, meticulous script. I stared at it for a moment. "He wrote to me several times," Raymond said gently. "Letters that, I suspect, never reached you?" My breath caught. "Because of Vanessa." Raymond didn't respond directly, but his silence spoke volumes. With slightly shaking hands, I opened the envelope and pulled out the letter. "Elaine, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and I can no longer say what I should have said while I was alive. That failure is mine alone. You were always different, not in a lesser way, but in a way I didn't understand. And instead of trying to, I retreated into what felt safe. Familiar. Vanessa was easy to support because she mirrored our world. You challenged it, and that scared me. But I've been watching from afar. Your work, your impact, the way you've built a name for yourself without our help, without connections, without shortcuts. I see your grandfather in you more than I ever saw in either of us. There is something you deserve to know, and something I've tried, in the time I had left, to make right. Dad?" I folded the letter, eyes stinging. "Your father amended the will," Raymond said quietly. 3 weeks before the accident." I looked up sharply. "What, he reevaluated the original inheritance plan in light of a clause in your grandfather's trust, one I believe no one in the family had ever discussed with you?" Raymond reached for a folder, opening it slowly. "Jonathan Miller. Your grandfather was a man of conviction. When he established Miller & Co., he set in place a succession clause not based on birth order, but on character, capability, and values. That clause was buried in the founding trust documents. For decades, your father overlooked it, until recently." He pushed a document across the desk. I scanned it. One paragraph stopped me cold upon the founder's death. Leadership and control of Miller & Co. "Shall pass to the descendant who best demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practice, creative innovation, and stewardship of legacy regardless of seniority or lineage." I looked up, stunned. "Your father," Raymond said, "re-examined this clause after reviewing your public work, press coverage, and community engagement. He came to the conclusion that you, not Vanessa, best represented the values Jonathan held most dear." The room felt suddenly smaller. He kept speaking, but the words came like waves, audible, but distant. "For what it's worth," he added after a moment, "I believe he meant to tell you in person. He visited my office several times in those final months. I've never seen him more conflicted or more resolved. The old ache I thought I had buried rose in my throat. He had tried. Maybe too late, but he had tried." "Does Vanessa know?" "No," Raymond said simply. "She'll learn when the will is read. In an hour." I nodded, gripping the arms of the chair. "So this was it. They tried to erase me. But my grandfather had left a clause. And my father, finally, had chosen to honor it." The conference room smelled like old paper and lemon polish. There was a long mahogany table in the center, polished to a mirror shine. I was the last to arrive. Vanessa was already seated near the head of the table, dressed in black like it was a uniform, not mourning. Beside her sat her husband, Carter, stoic, pressed, unreadable. She looked up as I walked in. For a moment, her face didn't move. Then a smile tight and composed. "I didn't realize you'd be staying for this," she said smoothly, folding her hands. "I assumed you'd be flying back to—" "Where is it now?" Portland Raymond asked me to attend. I said simply. pulling out a chair opposite her. "Apparently, there's more to the will than expected." Her smile twitched. The room slowly filled an aunt or two, some longtime business partners, a couple of senior members of the board. Most gave me polite, slightly puzzled nods. Some barely looked at me at all. And then Mr. Raymond entered. He looked every inch the old-world attorney, silver hair, dark suit, expression like marble. Behind him, 2 younger associates carried folders and a small black case. "Thank you all for being here," he began, placing the case on the table. "We're gathered for the reading of the last will and testament of Edward and Margaret Miller." The usual preamble followed legalities, acknowledgments, terms of execution. Vanessa looked supremely at ease, occasionally reaching for her glass of water, occasionally glancing at Carter as if expecting applause. It didn't take long before the atmosphere changed. Raymond lifted a hand. "I should inform you that this will contains an amendment executed 3 weeks prior to Mr. and Mrs. Miller's passing. This amendment is fully legal, witnessed, and notarized. Its contents supersede any previous declarations of succession." Vanessa straightened, just slightly. Her expression didn't falter, but her fingers tightened on the armrest. "I will begin with personal items." Raymond continued, reading from the document: art collections, jewelry, family heirlooms. He moved quickly through the list: my parents' vintage wine cellar to an uncle, the antique piano to a cousin. Vanessa received the family home and its contents, along with a substantial but not surprising personal trust. And then the room stilled. "Now," Raymond said, his tone shifting, "regarding ownership and control of Miller & Co. and all associated business entities." He looked up. "In accordance with the original succession clause established by the founder, Mr. Jonathan Miller, and reaffirmed by Edward Miller in his final amendment, primary ownership, controlling shares, and executive authority shall pass to," he paused, "Elaine Marie Miller." For a moment, there was nothing. No breath, no movement. Then Vanessa's voice, low and sharp. "Excuse me," Raymond didn't flinch. "Your father based this decision on the values outlined in your grandfather's founding documents: ethics, creativity, community stewardship. After months of independent evaluation and counsel, he concluded that Elaine best embodied those principles." "This is ridiculous," she snapped, rising slightly in her chair. "She hasn't been part of this family in years." "Actually," I said quietly, "you made sure of that." All eyes turned to me. "I know about the letters, the ones he tried to send me." Vanessa's expression barely changed, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the calculation, the realization that the narrative was slipping. "I never received them," I continued, "because you intercepted them. You told them I was unreachable, that I didn't want contact. That's not— You told people I'd had a breakdown. I said that I couldn't handle pressure. You erased me while I was still alive." Raymond interjected gently. "There's more?" He opened the black case and pulled out a small tablet. In anticipation of a potential challenge, he said, "Mr. Miller recorded a video statement. Shall I play it now?" Vanessa didn't respond, but Carter did. "Yes, play it." Raymond pressed play, and my father's face filled the screen. Older than I remembered, more tired, but calm, clear. "If you're seeing this," he said, "it means I'm no longer here to speak for myself, but make no mistake, this decision was mine. I made it after deep reflection, and I stand by it." He turned his gaze directly toward the camera, toward Vanessa, and that's when the unraveling truly began. The video played for just under 5 minutes, and yet, in that short span of time, everything shifted. My father's voice, measured and reflective, filled the silent room. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He admitted he had failed to see me clearly for most of my life, that he had clung to outdated notions of legacy and image, that he had equated confidence with capability, obedience with loyalty, that he had mistaken Vanessa's charm for vision and my distance for rejection. And then, just before the end, he said the line that lodged in everyone's chest like a stone, "Elaine, you are your grandfather's heir in every way that matters. You carry the heart of this company, not because you fought for it, but because you lived the values we forgot." The screen went black. No one moved. No one spoke. Vanessa sat frozen, her jaw locked, eyes glassy. Carter stared straight ahead, pale and tight-lipped. Raymond cleared his throat. As outlined, Elaine Miller will assume the role of CEO immediately, contingent on her acceptance. Ms. Vanessa Miller will retain her current position on an interim basis, pending a performance review. And that was when the storm broke. Vanessa stood so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "No, this isn't happening." Raymond remained calm. "You are, of course, free to contest the amendment. But I must inform you, the legal and medical documentation affirming your parents' capacity is extensive. The amendment was properly witnessed and notarized. The video, as you've seen, is merely an additional safeguard." "This is a setup," she snapped. My father was confused, grieving. He was manipulated. By who I asked, standing too. Me, I hadn't spoken to him in 5 years. Or maybe you mean the values he remembered too late, the ones you never bothered to live by. Her face flushed deep red. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. I held this family together. I ran the business while he sat in his study looking through dusty albums. You were off in Portland painting alley walls." "No," I said quietly. "I was building something, and I did it without lying, without using people." Raymond opened another folder, sliding it gently across the table toward her. "There's more," he said. "Your father also commissioned a financial audit." She froze. Carter reached for the folder before she could stop him. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Then he dropped it like it burned. "What is this?" he asked her, his voice low. It's nothing. It's just restructuring." "It's fraudulent," Raymond said. "Over the past 3 years, you funneled funds through shell accounts connected to Carter's investment firm. You authorized the undervalued sale of multiple properties to third parties with personal ties. You were preparing to dismantle the company's core assets." "That's not true," she snapped, but her voice had changed, frayed and breathless. "It's all documented," Raymond said calmly. "Emails, wire transfers, internal memos your father accessed before his death. I'm afraid this goes beyond family. You were stealing from him," I said, the words landing with more sorrow than venom. "While he was trying to make things right?" For a moment, I saw it real fear flickering in Vanessa's eyes. Not just of being caught, but of being seen. The real her, exposed without the armor of legacy. She turned toward the others, Carter, the board members, the relatives desperate for someone to rescue her. No one moved. Even Carter stayed silent, arms crossed now, eyes unreadable. "This isn't over," she whispered. Raymond nodded. "You may proceed with legal counsel, but I should warn you your father left instructions that any attempt to block the succession would trigger public release of the audit findings." Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands trembled at her sides. She looked at me for the first time, not as an afterthought, not as a sister, but as a threat. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said. "I do," I replied. "Do you?" And with that, she turned on her heel and walked out, Carter following without a word. The door clicked shut behind them. Silence settled again. Then Raymond turned to me. "Would you like to formally accept the role, Ms. Miller?" I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I accept." And for the first time since I'd stepped foot back in Boston, the room felt still in a different way, not tense, not hostile, just ready. The following days moved like a tide, slow, heavy, relentless. Meetings, introductions, security briefings, formal transitions, one by one. Department heads and board members filed into my office, unsure of how to treat me at first. I didn't blame them. Until a week ago, I had been nothing more than a family footnote, a name whispered in passing, often paired with the words estranged or artistic or not involved. But they learned quickly that I was not here to coast. I came in early, I stayed late, I asked questions, I listened. I didn't pretend to know everything about real estate. But I understood vision, I understood people, and I understood what my grandfather meant when he wrote about stewardship instead of control. A company like Miller & Co. wasn't just a machine, it was a mirror of its values, and mine were clear integrity, transparency, purpose. By the end of the first week, I had met with nearly every department. By the end of the second, I'd uncovered a dozen more irregularities, nothing illegal, but enough to confirm what my father had sensed before the end. Vanessa had been hollowing the company out from the inside, dressed in pearls and performance. But here's the part I didn't expect. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired and deeply sad, because underneath all her entitlement and manipulation, Vanessa had been a scared girl playing a part, one our parents had written for her, one she had clung to long after it stopped fitting. And somewhere, in the haze of meetings and inheritance and whispered boardroom gossip, I began to ask myself a question I hadn't considered since the reading. What would I have wanted if I'd been her one morning? I asked Raymond to arrange a private meeting. With Vanessa. He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? No, I said. But I think it needs to happen. We met in the old executive lounge, away from staff, away from eyes. She arrived late, of course, in oversized sunglasses and a camel coat that looked like armor. She didn't sit right away. I'm not here to beg, she said, voice sharp. Good, I replied. Because I'm not here to punish. She finally lowered her sunglasses. Her eyes were bloodshot and exhausted. I was angry, she said. Still am. You walked away. And then you just reappeared, with the keys to everything I was raised to believe would be mine. I didn't take it, I said quietly. You lost it. That landed. She sat down slowly, smoothing her skirt with trembling fingers. I was scared, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. After Dad changed. After he started pulling away from the plans, from me. You didn't just make mistakes. Vanessa, I said. You lied. You stole. You rewrote the truth to fit your version of it. She nodded. I know. And for the first time, I believed her. She wasn't sorry that she lost. She was sorry that she couldn't undo what had been done. And that was a start. I'm offering you a position, I said. She blinked. What, not as executive VP, not as decision maker. But you have instincts. You understand people, relationships, with oversight. I think you could help rebuild what you nearly broke. She looked stunned. Why would you do that? Because we were both handed the wrong scripts, I said. And maybe the only way to fix that is to stop pretending either of us had all the answers. She swallowed hard. What about Carter? There's no place for him here, I said firmly. Too much damage? Too much risk? She nodded. We're separating. I should have done it years ago. I didn't reply. I just let the silence settle between us. You really want to fix this place? She asked after a pause. I met her eyes. I want to restore what matters. Not the name, not the marble floors, the purpose, the reason Grandfather built any of this in the first place. She leaned back in her chair. For the first time in my life, Vanessa didn't look like a rival. She looked like a sister. Not one I trusted fully, but maybe finally one I could start over with. 6 months later, The nameplate on my office door read, Elaine M. Miller, CEO. But that wasn't what made me pause when I saw it each morning. What gave me pause, what gave me purpose, was what sat next to it, a framed sketch. My sketch. One I had done years ago when I was still in college. A charcoal rendering of my grandfather's first storefront, a modest brick building with a hand-painted sign, Miller & Co., Honest Land, Honest Hands. I found it in a storage closet during my first week on the job. Yellowed, bent, forgotten. Just like me, I had it restored, reframed, and placed beside the title I never thought I'd wear. It reminded me every day of the difference between owning something and understanding it. The company had changed in those 6 months. Not radically, not all at once, but it was changing quietly, steadily. We launched a community housing initiative in the same neighborhood where my grandfather started out. We brought in ethical architects, reinvested in environmental partnerships, and began revisiting old acquisitions that had sat dormant under Vanessa's leadership. I didn't do it alone. I built a team that valued transparency over tradition, impact over image. And when I split my time between Boston and Portland, I trusted that team to carry forward the mission. Because control wasn't the goal. Legacy was. Vanessa kept her word. She stepped into her new role without resistance. Oversight remained strict, and her work was reviewed by a third party. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she softened. The performance dropped. She listened more, spoke less. Sometimes, she even stayed late with the junior analysts, helping them prep for presentations. We weren't close. We probably never would be. But we weren't enemies anymore. That was enough. I also launched something that didn't exist before, the Miller Foundation for Creative Access, a nonprofit arm of the company dedicated to funding artists from overlooked communities. Every year, we would sponsor 10 residencies, host 2 gallery shows, and offer grants to schools that had cut art from their curriculum. The board resisted at first, but when they saw the coverage, the community turnout, the real impact, they stopped resisting and started believing. I stood at the podium during the foundation's inaugural event, looking out at the audience, my team, the board, old partners, new faces, and yes, even Vanessa and I said, my grandfather built this company not just to sell buildings, but to shape lives. That's the inheritance that matters. Not marble or titles, but the values we choose to carry forward. After the applause and the wine and the quiet congratulations, I returned to the office, late, alone. Martha, our longtime housekeeper who had stayed on part-time as building steward, met me outside my office with something wrapped in tissue paper. Your father meant for you to have this, she said. It was a journal, leather-bound, worn. His handwriting filled the pages, reflections from his final year. Some were mundane meetings, market updates, others were deeply personal. One entry read, "Saw Elaine's work featured in an art magazine today. She didn't tell me. She never tells me. And I don't blame her. But I wish she knew how proud I am. Another, I let Vanessa carry a burden she wasn't ready for. I let Elaine walk away when I should have asked her to stay. I thought loyalty looked like obedience. I see now it looks more like courage." And one final line, written just 3 days before the accident: she was never the spare. She was the light we never looked at directly. I closed the journal with trembling hands, not out of grief, but grace. He had seen me. Maybe too late, but he had seen me. And I had taken that recognition not to destroy what was broken, but to build something better. My legacy wouldn't be the one they wrote for me. It would be the one I rewrote for us all. And in the end, that was the only inheritance I ever truly wanted.